Hello, and welcome back to History for the HSC. Today is our 7th video in the HSC Modern History core topic of power and authority in the modern world. Today we're going to be taking a look at the following syllabus outcomes. The conditions that enabled dictators to rise to power in the interwar period, and the rise of the Nazi Party and Hitler in Germany and the collapse of the Weimar Republic. So please join us as we take another deep dive into this power and authority topic. We will break today's topic up into the following sections. Firstly, the origins of the Nazi Party and what brought Hitler into contact with them. Secondly, the beer hall or Munich Putsch in 1923 that saw Hitler and the party attempt to overthrow the government. Thirdly, how the party turned around following the disaster of Munich and built support for itself within the Weimar Republic. And lastly, what happened in 1932 and 1933 that saw Hitler invited into power. So, let's get started. In those chaotic years that followed the defeat of Germany, in World War I, there was a wave of nationalistic political groups being founded. The largest, initially at least, was the German National People's Party, but smaller groups were being set up throughout Germany and throughout Bavaria in particular. One of these small, nationalistic right-wing groups was the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, or German Workers' Party, founded in 1919 by Anton Drexler. Drexler worked as a locksmith by trade, and then at the railways. And the party at this point was really just a collection of his colleagues from the railways meeting to discuss ideas of pan-Germanism and nationalism. It really did not look like this would be the party that would turn Germany on its head. Drexler did not appear to be the type of leader that would be capable of pushing the party to greatness. The great American historian and war correspondent William L. Schreier would describe him this way in his book. A locksmith by trade, who may be said to be the actual founder of National Socialism, a sickly, bespectacled man, lacking a formal education with an independent but narrow and confused mind, a poor writer and a worse speaker. The reality of the party in these early years was that it was just one of many right-wing political groups within the Bavarian region of Germany. It was not even the largest, with only around 38 members in August 1919. It was about at this time that Hitler became aware of the party's existence. Hitler had served with the German army during World War I and was one of the relatively small number of people able to secure continued employment within the army following its considerable reduction in lines with the Treaty of Versailles. He was tasked with the job of being an informant or army spy. This was partially to keep an eye on the various political groups that were forming in the region, but also to try and ensure that other soldiers within his regiment maintained what was considered to be an appropriate nationalistic political ideology. One of the many groups that Hitler was tasked to investigate was Drexler's Deutsche Arbeiterpartei. Hitler found here a group of people who shared many of the same anti-Semitic, nationalistic, anti-capitalist, anti-Marxist ideas that he had. At a party meeting on the 12th of September, Hitler would engage in a stand-up argument with another visitor who was arguing against Bavarian separatism. His ability to argue would impress Drexler so much he would encourage Hitler to join the party. Hitler joined a week later, becoming the 55th member of the party. Now, the reasons for Hitler joining are somewhat up for debate. Hitler claims to have spent the week wrestling with himself on whether or not he should join. He had initially desired to actually start his own party, but apparently came to believe that as the party at this point was so small, he could easily rise to leadership within it. However, the reality is that Hitler still remained an employee of the army at this point and was technically not actually allowed to join any political party. He was given permission by his captain, however, to do so anyway, and perhaps this suggests that joining the party at this point was still part of his employment within the army as a way of keeping tracks on what they were doing. As we zoom in on Hitler's membership card, we can see some of the issues that exist in the primary sources that we're dealing with. Firstly, if we take a look at his membership number, we'll see it is shown as member number 7. This is a figure that would first appear in Hitler's book Mein Kampf that he would write some years later. Secondly, the date shown for his membership is the 1st of January 1920. However, Hitler appears to have joined several months earlier to this. So how do we reconcile these issues? Well, when Hitler first joined the party, there was no numbering system in terms of party membership. And this would only change when in January 1920, the party would reissue memberships to all existing members, and this time with a member number attached, those member numbers being assigned in alphabetical order. At that point, Hitler would receive the member number of 555, becoming the 55th member of the party. It's important to realize here that the party had started counting at 500 just to make themselves seem a little bit larger than they really were. This claim of Hitler being the 7th person to have become a member of the party seems to have come out of Hitler's desire to be seen as much more of a founding member of the party than he really was. It is true, however, that he was the 7th executive member of the party's leading committee. Hitler's first speech to the party would occur on the 16th of October 1919, and he would quickly rise in influence within the group. His energetic and passionate speeches brought more and more people into the fold. And by early 1920, he was serving as the chief of propaganda within the party and set about rebranding the party and clearing up its ideological basis. This would include adopting the swastika and Nazi flag designed by Hitler himself. On the 24th of February 1920, Hitler organized another party meeting which would see 2,000 people attend, their largest meeting to date. Here, the party would change its name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party, and articulate clearly for the first time what their ideology really was by announcing the 25-point program of the party. This called, amongst other issues, for the abolition of the Treaty of Versailles and a return to authoritarian rule in Germany. This meeting would become violent as counter-protesters outside attempted to disrupt them, and some of Hitler's former army comrades stationed outside would fight back and push these protesters away. These men would form the basis of the Sturmabteilung, or the Storm Detachment, the Brown Shirts. This Nazi paramilitary force helped to attract still more attention to the party. It became a place of refuge for many disenfranchised soldiers and angry soldiers. They often engaged in physical conflict with members of rival political groups, particularly the communists. Beyond this, their army styling initially helped to provide a level of legitimacy to the fledgling party that they otherwise would have been lacking. Hitler would refocus the goals and ideology of the party to suit his own ideas, describing it in this way: a racialist movement with a firm social base, a hold over the broad masses, welded together in an iron hand organization, instilled with a blind obedience and inspired by a brutal will. However, at this time, Anton Drexler still remained nominally the leader, and the tensions between the two men would continue to mount. Following one such dispute on the 11th of July 1921, Hitler would actually resign from the party. And the rest of the party leadership realized that without Hitler, their star propagandist and speaker, the party would fall apart. They came to him and begged him to return. He agreed to return on one condition: that he replaced Drexler as chairman and would have dictatorial parties within the party with the title of Führer. This would form the basis of the Führerprinzip, a critical aspect of Nazi ideology. The popularity of the party continued to grow, and by 1923 membership would reach 55,000. At the height of the hyperinflation crisis, Hitler believed that the time had come to strike out and take power from the Weimar Republic. Their inability to effectively deal with the challenge of hyperinflation had brought out much anger and increasing support to the Nazi Party. Hitler now sought to overthrow the government in Bavaria. Taking inspiration from Mussolini's march on Rome that had seen the Italian fascists be given power through the threat of force, Hitler believed he could accomplish much the same within Germany. His plan was to take the leaders of the state of Bavaria hostage and then to declare an independent state in Bavaria. From there, he would send the Bavarian army to conquer the rest of Germany and unite it all under himself. Now, if this plan seems slightly optimistic, it was. Even Hitler himself would later admit that it had been a mistake, that they had not been ready, and really had not had the support that they required. However, it was not without any logic. One key ally Hitler had during this was the World War I general Ludendorff, a man unapologetically critical of the Weimar regime, as he would publish in his war memoirs. By the revolution, the Germans have made themselves pariahs among the nations, incapable of winning allies, helots in the service of foreigners and foreign capital, and deprived of all self-respect. In 20 years' time, the German people will curse the parties who now boast of having made the revolution. With Ludendorff at his side, Hitler believed he had the support of the army, that they wouldn't attack him. In fact, that they would work with him. Further, he believed some of the Bavarian ministers that he was planning to take captive also wished to get rid of the Weimar regime. Indeed, some of them had been heard plotting their own attempted takeovers. Now, these two factors combined led Hitler to be overconfident in his chances of success. The putsch would take place on the night of the 8th of November 1923 and was essentially doomed from the start. The beer hall where the leaders of Bavaria were meeting was taken easily by the brown shirts and was surrounded, but Ludendorff himself was several hours late in arriving. Hitler would try and fail to convince these leaders of Bavaria that he had the support of Ludendorff. They simply didn't believe him. And beyond this, when the brown shirts attempted to occupy a local army barracks, they were fired upon, something else that Hitler had not expected. When Ludendorff finally arrived, Hitler left the captured Bavarian ministers in his care and went out in order to see what was happening elsewhere within the city. Ludendorff would then give permission for them to go home and speak to their wives and to tell them that nothing was wrong. This was a monumental mistake which quickly led to several phone calls from these Bavarian ministers to the government in Berlin, the German army being quickly mobilized to put down the attempted coup. As the situation fell apart, Hitler and Ludendorff decided to march on the town hall, hoping somehow that their plan still might work. And they were fired upon by the army. Hitler himself was injured and would be captured a few days later. Whilst the putsch itself may have been an unmitigated disaster, the trial was another matter. Hitler, along with General Ludendorff, SA leader Ernst Röhm, and later deputy of the Nazi Party Rudolf Hess, along with several other men, were charged with treason. The judges at the trial were sympathetic to the Nazi cause. As we've seen in earlier videos, this was an identified weakness within the Weimar regime. Much of the judiciary had not changed since the days of the Kaiser and still retained conservative anti-Weimar sentiments. And as a result, Hitler was given as much time as he wanted to answer questions and to speak out against the corruption of the regime that he believed existed. Hitler's opening remarks in his defense would go on for 4 hours, and in it he claimed ultimate responsibility for the failed coup, attacking the Weimar regime, communists, and racial minorities. He called the Bavarian ministers who had failed to support them cowards who failed to do what was right at the time. And these same thoughts would be echoed by the other men on trial. International media attention followed these trials, and so Hitler was finding a larger audience than just Bavaria. The judge's willingness to allow him to speak his mind, so long as he didn't implicate them or the Bavarian leadership, gave him carte blanche to express his ideology to the people of Germany and even to the world. Even the prosecuting lawyers did not really seek to push for a real punishment or any real acceptance of guilt. The chief lawyer, Ludwig Stenglein, would remark, "A high, perhaps morally legitimate goal does not justify the use of criminal means," suggesting that he too agreed with Hitler's end goal. Going further, he would exclaim that the men on trial for the Bihor Putsch had shown an honest effort to inspire belief in the German cause, and said, "As human beings, we cannot withhold our respect from Hitler." Now, the verdicts handed down were equally laughable. The maximum punishment that the court could have handed out was life in prison. This was not to occur. General Ludendorff would be acquitted of all charges, a free man again, with no convictions against him and able actually to run for presidential election in a year or two later. 5 of the other defendants would be found guilty of aiding actions of high treason and would be placed only on prohibition with no prison time. Hitler and 3 other defendants alone would be found guilty of treason. Their sentence, 5 years in prison, eligible for parole in only 6 months, the absolute minimum that was allowed under German law. Hitler's prison time would be spent at the Landsberg prison, a former military fortress where Hitler was treated essentially as an honored guest. He was free to have visitors and had essentially free rein to walk around where he pleased within the prison. He spent his time dictating Mein Kampf, his book that would outline Nazi ideology to a great extent, focusing on the nature of the world as being one of the struggle between the strong and the weak, where the strong would destroy the weak, and of German imperialistic expansion and what he called Lebensraum. The Bavarian Parole Board would go on to vote to release Hitler on the 19th of December after only 8 months in prison. The Bihor Putsch may have been an unmitigated disaster at the time, but the trial and subsequent popularity of Hitler throughout Germany undoubtedly helped push him onto the national stage. Following the failed Bihor Putsch, the Nazi Party was banned in Bavaria and Hitler banned from speaking in public for some time following his release from prison. This would continue for a few years before the bans were revoked. And as a result, the party would take some time to rebuild. It was not until 1928 that the upward trajectory of the party was really established. 1928 was the first year that the Nazi Party would receive votes in the National Reichstag elections. They were still a minor party. The Social Democrat Party would receive about 30% of the vote, while the Nazis only around 2.5%. These, remember, were the golden years of the Republic, under the leadership of Stresemann. And as we've seen in earlier videos, a link perhaps above, this time support for the Liberal and the Centre parties, like the Social Democrats, reached its height, and support for the extreme parties, like the Nazis, faded. The people who voted for the Nazis in 1928 had drifted from other right-wing nationalist parties, not from the Centre parties. But as we saw, the Great Depression had a massive impact on the economic recovery of Germany. As foreign loans were called in, the German economy collapsed once more and unemployment reached its height of around 30%. For young Germans, it was even higher. Half of all men aged 16 to 30 were unemployed. and these men in particular were drawn to Hitler and his party. Unemployment also led to a raft of other issues. Shanty towns sprung up around Germany, and homelessness increased. Arrests for theft increased by close to a quarter. The Chancellor at the time, Heinrich Brüning, attempted to solve these issues through a series of laws. Unemployment benefits were slashed, taxes were raised. And this combination of higher taxes for those already struggling and even less money for the desperate who were completely unemployed saw even more and more voters move to the extremes of the political spectrum in search for an answer. Brüning's ability to govern grew weaker and weaker. He remained Chancellor through a series of coalition governments, but as these failed, he was increasingly forced to rule via Article 48. The collapse of these more liberal political parties saw the meteoric rise of popularity of the Nazi Party. In 1930, the Social Democrats lost seats, achieving only 24% of the vote. Whilst still the largest party, they now had new competition from the Nazi Party, who achieved 18% of the popular vote that year. By July 1932, the Social Democrats lost the popular vote, achieving only 21.5%. The Nazis became the most popular party in the Reichstag, with 37% of the total vote. A second election would be held in 1932 that would see the Social Democrats achieve 20.5% of the vote and the Nazi Party 33%. So these external factors clearly had a massive impact on the rising popularity of the Nazi Party within Germany. But to explain their rise to power, we really need to go deeper than just economic and political situations in Germany. Importantly, we need to understand why the Nazi Party in particular became so appealing. Membership in the party had plummeted dramatically following the Beer Putsch, from over 55,000 in 1923 to only 7,000 in 1924. Even Anton Drexler, the founder of the party, had left following the failed coup d'etat. The party, however, rebuilt itself following the Beer Putsch, beginning at the Bamberg Conference on the 14th of February 1926. This was fundamental in uniting the party behind a single ideology and a single leader. The concept of the Führer principle was agreed upon, Hitler's dictatorial power over the party becoming undisputed and complete. Hitler recognized the importance also of appealing to different groups. Nazi propaganda from this time forward would increasingly target specific social and industry groups, such as the Nazi Students' League, the Physicians' League, the Teachers' League, and the Women's League. The Heil Hitler salute was adopted. The party committed to a program of destroying the hated liberal democracy via the instruments of democracy. In effect, Hitler planned to achieve political success within the Weimar Republic on the platform of removing many of the political freedoms that citizens had once he had gained power. And along with this, Hitler continued to build relationships with the traditional conservative elites in the army, the judiciary, and in large business. During his trial, he was careful not to attack the German army. He recognized he would need their support should he ever wish to gain power. This rebranding and propaganda from within the Nazi Party appealed to people from many, if not most, walks of life within the struggling German state, as membership within the party rebounded to its 1923 levels. By 1932, Hitler was the undisputed leader of the largest party in the German Reichstag. In March 1932, in the midst of the unemployment crisis that had been spawned by the Great Depression, German citizens went to the polls in the presidential elections. The currently sitting president and World War I General Paul von Hindenburg had been elected in 1925 and, 7 years later, sought re-election again. He would receive some 49.6% of the votes that year. This was the largest number of votes by far. The second most popular candidate was Hitler, who'd received 30% of the vote. Now, whilst this was clearly a loss, it was far more than anyone had really expected him to achieve. Importantly, German law required that a majority of voters, that is over 50%, of people vote for a candidate for it to be them to be eligible. So despite Hindenburg receiving the most votes, he could not be elected president. A new election would need to be called. That election would occur in April and would see Hitler on the campaign trail in a way that was not common in 1932, using a plane to travel around Germany and speak to large crowds of people. The SA put on parades, and Hitler's popularity nationwide skyrocketed. As a result, he received 36% of the popular vote in this election. It was still not enough, however, to eclipse Hindenburg, who this time received 53% of the vote and was declared the victor. The majority of these new votes for Hindenburg came from supporters of other candidates, particularly the Communist Party candidate, as people recognized that a victory for Hindenburg would be preferable to a victory for Hitler. Now, it was hoped that Hindenburg's re-election would bring some sort of stability to the Republic, but this was not to be. By May, the Chancellor, Brüning, would be forced to resign. He had attempted to bring some sort of order to the Reichstag by banning the SS and the SA. This angered the Nazi Party, who at this point were the second largest party in the Reichstag. Beyond this, he'd also suggested a scheme to take land from the wealthy landowners and use it to house the unemployed, and this lost him the support of Hindenburg. Brüning's resignation left Hindenburg to appoint a new chancellor, and he chose Franz von Papen, hoping that stability could be brought in this parliament. By July 1932, elections for the Reichstag were held. Von Papen struggled to control the Reichstag, and the elections themselves were characterized by political violence from many sides. As we saw earlier, these elections would result in the Nazis gaining the largest proportion of the votes, 37%, and becoming the largest party in the Reichstag. Hitler would then demand to be made chancellor as the leader of the largest party, as would be custom. Hindenburg, however, refused. And as the president appointed the chancellor, there was very little that Hitler could do about this. Von Papen would remain chancellor in a Reichstag where Hitler and the Nazis were actually the largest party. By November, von Papen would call for new Reichstag elections. He hoped that these elections would actually lessen the popularity of the Nazi Party and give the Social Democrats a large enough number of seats to govern, perhaps in a coalition with another party. Whilst the Nazis did lose some seats during this election, it was still not enough, and they remained the largest party. Hindenburg was furious with von Papen's failure to bring good governance to the Reichstag, and he would be sacked in order for another chancellor to be appointed. Now, once more, it would not be Hitler who would be appointed, but Kurt von Schleier, a former World War I general, who was made chancellor in December. He too would struggle to bring the Reichstag under control. By January 1933, the Reichstag was still in chaos, and it was then that von Papen made a fateful decision. He came to the conclusion that the only way to form a functioning government would to be develop some sort of alliance with the Nazis, and he approached Hindenburg with his ideas. After some consideration, Hindenburg relented, naming Hitler chancellor. Von Papen and Hindenburg believed that they could control Hitler. They planned to make von Papen deputy chancellor and only to allow 2 Nazi party members within key leadership roles of the coalition that would rule. They hoped that this would enable a coalition government to form and run the country as it slowly exited the worst of the Great Depression in 1933. So Hitler was now Chancellor of Germany. Whilst not dictator, he did at least enjoy dictatorial power over his own party, and it would not be long before this situation would change once more, and Hitler would further consolidate his rule. This has been History for the HSC and our deep dive into the rise of the Nazi Party. Remember that you can download this end screen as a poster using the links below. There'll be links appearing on the screen as well now to one another of our other videos that you might like, as well as the subscribe button. You can use that if you like. Join us next week as we see how from this early point Hitler was able to consolidate his power and come to rule as unquestioned dictator within Germany.